Picture this. You're standing at the altar, seconds away from saying "I do" to the person you've spent 3 years building a life with. The music is playing, your family is watching, and then your fiance looks you dead in the eye and says, "I can't marry you. I'm in love with someone else." Now imagine that person is your best friend. And imagine the whole thing happening in front of 200 people with cameras rolling. That's exactly what happened to Sarah Mitchell in San Francisco, and what her ex-fiance didn't know was that the woman he humiliated that day was about to become one of the most powerful people in the tech industry. This isn't a fairy tale. This isn't even a revenge story in the way you might think. This is about what happens when someone mistakes your quiet strength for weakness, when they confuse humility with lack of ambition, and when they realize far too late that the person they threw away was worth more than they could ever imagine. Because while Sarah's ex-fiancé Michael was celebrating what he thought was his upgrade, Sarah was building something that would change everything. And by the time he figured out what he'd lost, she was so far ahead that he couldn't even see her anymore. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how we got here, we need to go back 3 years, to a time when Sarah Mitchell was just another software engineer grinding away in a tiny apartment in Oakland, writing code that nobody thought would amount to anything. She wasn't flashy. She didn't post about her work on social media. She didn't even tell most people what she was building. She just worked, quietly and relentlessly, on something she believed would matter. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Sarah grew up in a middle-class family in Portland, Oregon. Her father was a high school math teacher. Her mother worked as a nurse, and money was always tight, but never a source of shame. From a young age, Sarah had this quiet determination about her. She wasn't the loudest person in the room, but she was always the one who finished what she started. In high school, while her friends were worried about prom and popularity, Sarah was teaching herself to code using free resources online. She got a partial scholarship to Berkeley, worked 2 jobs to cover the rest, and graduated with honors in computer science. But even then, nobody really saw her coming. She wasn't the type to brag or network aggressively. She just did the work. After college, she landed a job at a mid-sized tech company in San Francisco, but she was already thinking bigger. Every night after work, she'd come home to her cramped studio apartment and work on her own project, a software platform that used artificial intelligence to streamline supply chain logistics for small and medium-sized businesses. It wasn't sexy, it wasn't consumer-facing, but Sarah knew it was important. She knew that if she could crack the problem of making supply chain management accessible and affordable for smaller companies, she could change entire industries. So she worked. Alone, quietly, for 2 years. Sarah met Michael Brennan at a tech networking event in 2019. He was everything she wasn't: outgoing, charismatic, effortlessly confident. He worked as an investment analyst at a boutique firm that specialized in tech acquisitions, and he had this way of making you feel like you were the most important person in the room when he talked to you. Sarah wasn't used to that kind of attention. She'd always been the person people overlooked at parties, the one who got interrupted mid-sentence or whose ideas got credited to someone else in meetings. But Michael saw her, or at least that's what she thought. Their first conversation was about machine learning applications in financial modeling. Michael seemed genuinely interested in her work, asking thoughtful questions, taking notes on his phone. By the end of the night, he'd asked for her number, and 2 weeks later, they were dating. For Sarah, it felt like everything was finally falling into place. She had meaningful work she was passionate about, and now she had someone who seemed to value her for who she was. Michael was supportive, at least in the beginning. He'd bring her coffee when she was coding late into the night, listen to her talk through problems with her algorithms, even offer to introduce her to potential investors when the time was right. But there were small things, little moments that Sarah brushed off at the time but would later remember with painful clarity. The way Michael would glance at his phone when she was explaining something technical, the way he'd sometimes cut her off to talk about his own work, the way he'd introduce her at parties as my girlfriend who does computer stuff, rather than actually explaining what she did. Sarah told herself it didn't matter. She told herself that Michael loved her, that these were just minor communication differences, that she was being too sensitive. Jessica Torres had been Sarah's best friend since their sophomore year at Berkeley. They'd met in a data structures class, bonded over terrible dining hall food and all-nighters before exams, and stayed close even after graduation. Jessica was different from Sarah in almost every way. Where Sarah was quiet and focused, Jessica was vibrant and social. She worked in marketing at a fashion tech startup, knew everyone in the San Francisco scene, and had the kind of effortless style that made people do double takes. But despite their differences, they'd always been there for each other. Or so Sarah thought. When Sarah introduced Michael to Jessica about 6 months into the relationship, she remembered feeling proud to have a partner who was successful and charming, proud to share that part of her life with her closest friend. The three of them started hanging out regularly. Dinners in the Mission District, weekend hikes in Marin, game nights at Sarah's apartment. Jessica would give Michael advice about his career, and he'd help her think through some of the business strategy questions she had about her startup. It all seemed natural. It all seemed fine. But something was shifting, subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. Jessica started texting Michael directly instead of going through Sarah. She'd ask him for recommendations on restaurants or advice on tech trends, little things that didn't seem inappropriate on their own, but added up to something that made Sarah uncomfortable. When Sarah mentioned it to Michael, he laughed it off. "She's your best friend," he said. "She's just being friendly. Don't be paranoid." So Sarah swallowed her discomfort and tried to focus on her work. In January of 2021, Michael proposed. He did it at the top of Twin Peaks at sunset, with the entire city sprawling out below them, and Sarah said yes without hesitation. She loved him. She trusted him. She thought they were building a future together. The wedding was set for October of that same year. Sarah threw herself into planning while also pushing hard on her startup. She'd recently brought on a small team of contractors and was preparing to launch a beta version of her platform. Money was tight, so the wedding was going to be modest by San Francisco standards, about 200 guests, a venue in Napa Valley, simple but elegant. Jessica was the maid of honor, of course. She helped Sarah pick out her dress, organized the bachelorette party, and seemed genuinely excited about the wedding. But there were moments that made Sarah pause, like when Jessica posted a photo of herself and Michael from a dinner the three of them had attended, cropping Sarah out of the frame. Or when Sarah overheard Jessica on the phone with someone saying, "Yeah, Michael's great. I mean, Sarah's lucky she found him. Not, they're lucky to have each other. Just that Sarah was lucky." As the wedding got closer, Sarah noticed Michael becoming more distant. He was working longer hours, coming home late, sometimes not coming home at all, claiming he had to stay at the office to finish reports. When Sarah tried to talk to him about it, he'd get defensive, accusing her of not understanding the pressure he was under at work. She believed him because she wanted to believe him, because the alternative was too painful to consider. The week before the wedding, Sarah's world started to crack. It began with something small. Sarah was using Michael's laptop because hers was updating, and a message notification popped up on the screen. It was from Jessica. "I can't stop thinking about last night." Sarah's stomach dropped. She told herself it could be innocent, that maybe they'd all hung out and she'd forgotten, that there was some explanation, but she couldn't stop herself from opening the message thread. What she found destroyed her. Months of messages, flirtatious at first, then explicit. Plans to meet up when Sarah was working late. Photos, things that made it clear this wasn't just an emotional affair, but a full relationship that had been going on behind her back for at least 6 months. Sarah sat there staring at the screen, feeling like the floor had disappeared beneath her. The two people she trusted most in the world had been lying to her face for half a year. She thought about canceling the wedding right then, but something stopped her. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was the part of her that couldn't believe this was real, that kept thinking there had to be some explanation, or maybe it was pride, the refusal to let them know they'd broken her. She closed the laptop. She didn't confront Michael. She didn't call Jessica. She went back to work on her code, her fingers shaking so badly she could barely type, and she decided she would wait until the wedding day to see what Michael would do. Part of her, the part that still loved him despite everything, hoped he'd do the right thing. The other part of her, the part that was already hardening into something colder and more calculating, knew exactly what was going to happen. October 16th, 2021. The day Sarah Mitchell was supposed to become Sarah Brennan. The venue was beautiful, a vineyard in Napa with golden light filtering through the grapevines. 200 guests filled the seats. Sarah's parents sat in the front row, her father fighting back tears, her mother clutching a tissue. Jessica stood at the altar in her lavender bridesmaid dress, looking down at her bouquet, refusing to meet Sarah's eyes, and Michael stood there in his suit, pale and sweating, looking like a man about to jump off a cliff. Sarah walked down the aisle in her simple white dress, a design she'd chosen because Michael said he liked understated elegance. The whole time she watched his face, looking for any sign of the man she'd fallen in love with. She didn't find it. When they reached the part of the ceremony where the officiant asked if anyone objected, the silence was deafening. Then came the vows. The officiant turned to Michael first, and that's when it happened. Michael looked at Sarah, and she could see it in his eyes, the decision he'd already made. "I can't do this," he said, his voice barely audible at first, then louder. "I can't marry you. I'm in love with someone else." The gasps from the crowd were immediate. Sarah's mother let out a small cry. Sarah stood there, frozen, bouquet in hand, feeling 200 pairs of eyes on her. "Who?" someone shouted from the back. Michael didn't answer, but his eyes flicked to Jessica, and that was enough. Jessica was already moving, gathering her dress, rushing toward the back of the venue as people started whispering, pointing, pulling out their phones. Sarah watched her run. She watched the woman she'd called her sister for nearly a decade flee like a coward, and something inside her that had been cracking all week finally shattered completely. But here's the thing about Sarah Mitchell. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't make a scene. She looked at Michael, really looked at him, and she felt something unexpected. Not heartbreak, not rage, clarity. She saw him for exactly what he was, small, weak, and temporary. A man so insecure in himself that he needed to conquer rather than commit, to trade rather than build. She handed her bouquet to the officiant, turned to the crowd, and said in a voice that was eerily calm, "I apologize for wasting your time. Please enjoy the reception. The food is already paid for." Then she walked out of that venue with her head high, got into the car she'd arranged for their exit, and drove away alone. The story hit social media within hours. Videos of the wedding, photos of Sarah walking out, speculation about who the other woman was. By the next morning it was everywhere. Gossip blogs, Twitter threads, TikTok videos with millions of views. People who'd never met Sarah suddenly had opinions about her life. Some felt sorry for her. Others made jokes. A few blamed her, suggesting she must have done something to drive Michael away. Sarah deleted all her social media accounts and disappeared. She didn't respond to calls from family or friends. She didn't issue statements or try to control the narrative. She just vanished. Michael and Jessica, meanwhile, went public with their relationship almost immediately. There were photos of them at expensive restaurants, vacation shots from Cabo, magazine profiles about Michael's rising star in the investment world. Jessica posted long captions about following your heart and not living a lie, never once acknowledging what they'd done or who they'd hurt. The public forgot about Sarah quickly. In the internet age, 15 minutes of fame is generous. By December, most people had moved on to the next scandal. What nobody knew was where Sarah had gone or what she was doing. She'd cut ties with almost everyone, holed up in a new apartment in Oakland that nobody knew about, and poured every ounce of her pain and rage into her work. The software platform she'd been building, the one she'd been working on while Michael was lying to her face, was almost ready. She called it LogiSync, and it was about to change everything. For the next 8 months, Sarah lived like a ghost. She worked 18-hour days, surviving on coffee and takeout, barely sleeping, communicating with her small team entirely through encrypted messages and video calls where she kept her camera off. She used the money she'd saved for the wedding, about $30,000, to fund the beta launch of LogiSync. The platform did exactly what she'd designed it to do. It used machine learning to predict supply chain disruptions, optimize inventory management, and reduce costs for small businesses by an average of 23%. The early users were mostly small manufacturing companies and regional retailers, businesses that couldn't afford the enterprise-level solutions that bigger companies used. Within 3 months, LogiSync had 500 paying customers. Within 6 months, that number hit 5,000. The revenue started small, but it scaled fast. Sarah reinvested every dollar back into the platform, hiring a full development team, improving the AI models, and expanding into new markets. She didn't take a salary. She lived off her savings and the small amounts of contract work she did on the side. She had no life outside of LogiSync, no friends, no hobbies, no distractions. Just code and strategy and this burning need to prove something, though she wasn't entirely sure anymore whether she was trying to prove it to Michael or to herself. By the summer of 2022, LogiSync was generating $3 million in annual recurring revenue and growing at a rate that was catching the attention of people in the industry. That's when the acquisition offers started coming in. First from smaller firms offering a few million, then from mid-sized companies offering 8 figures. Sarah turned them all down. She wasn't building LogiSync to sell it. She was building it to win. In September of 2022, Sarah got a call that would change everything. It was from the CFO of Titan Logistics, one of the largest supply chain management companies in the United States, a corporation with annual revenue of over $12 billion. They'd been watching LogiSync's growth, and they wanted to meet. The CFO, a woman named Patricia Chen, flew out to San Francisco personally. She sat down with Sarah in a conference room that Sarah had rented for the occasion because LogiSync still didn't have a proper office, just a co-working space and a distributed team. Patricia didn't waste time with small talk. "Your platform does in 3 months what takes our enterprise systems 3 years and 10 times the budget," she said. "We want to acquire LogiSync, integrate it into our operations, and scale it globally. We're prepared to offer you $42 million. Sarah looked at her, and for the first time in months, she felt something other than numbness. She felt powerful. "No," Sarah said. Patricia blinked. "Excuse me?" "I'm not interested in selling," Sarah said, "but I am interested in a partnership. License my technology, give me a seat on your board, and let's talk about a strategic alliance where LogiSync remains independent, but powers your entire operation, and I want equity in Titan as part of the deal." Patricia stared at her for a long moment, then smiled. "You have guts. I like that. Let me talk to our board." 3 weeks later, the deal was done. Not an acquisition, but a partnership. LogiSync would license its platform to Titan Logistics for 5 years with an option to extend. In exchange, Sarah would receive $35 million up front, continuing royalties based on usage, and a 3% equity stake in Titan Logistics, which was valued at roughly $15 million at the time. The total deal value was estimated at $50 million over 5 years. More importantly, it gave Sarah credibility, resources, and connections that would let her take LogiSync to the next level. The deal was announced publicly in October of 2022, almost exactly 1 year after the wedding that never happened. The press release was straightforward, just the facts, nothing emotional or personal. Titan Logistics announces strategic partnership with LogiSync, a revolutionary AI-powered supply chain platform founded by Sarah Mitchell. But the tech world noticed immediately. This wasn't just a story about a successful startup. This was a story about a woman who'd been humiliated publicly, disappeared, and then emerged as a player in an industry worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Within days, the story was everywhere again. But this time, it was different. This time, Sarah wasn't the victim. She was the protagonist. Business journals wrote profiles about her. Podcasts invited her on to talk about the technical aspects of Logisync. Investors who'd ignored her cold emails a year ago were now begging for meetings. And Michael and Jessica, who'd been living their best life on social media, suddenly went very quiet. See, here's what Michael didn't know when he left Sarah at that altar. The company he worked for, the boutique investment firm where he was supposedly this rising star, had recently been acquired by a larger financial group, and that larger financial group had very close ties to Titan Logistics. They worked together on deals, shared clients, referred business to each other, which meant that Michael's professional world and Sarah's professional world were about to collide in the most uncomfortable way possible. Michael first heard about Sarah's success from a colleague who forwarded him a TechCrunch article about the Titan partnership. At first, he didn't believe it. Sarah, his ex-fiancée, who used to work on her laptop in sweatpants, the woman who was so focused on her little project that she barely noticed when he was pulling away, that Sarah had just signed a deal worth $50 million. He went down a rabbit hole reading every article he could find, looking at the photos of Sarah at the announcement press conference. She looked different. Her hair was shorter. She was wearing a tailored suit. She looked confident, successful, and completely done with everything that had come before. Michael felt something he hadn't expected. Panic. Not because he still loved her, he didn't, but because he'd spent the last year telling himself a story about who he was and who she was. In his version, he'd left a smart but unambitious woman for someone more exciting, someone who understood his need for status and success. He'd told himself that Sarah would probably end up at some boring corporate job, maybe eventually marry some guy who was okay with mediocrity, and that she'd always look back on him as the one who got away. This new information destroyed that story completely. Sarah wasn't mediocre. She never had been. She'd been building something significant while he was building nothing, coasting on charm and connections, thinking that was the same as actual achievement. And worse, he was about to find out just how much his decision had cost him in ways he couldn't have predicted. In December of 2022, Michael's firm announced a major restructuring. They were focusing on fewer, larger deals, which meant cutting staff. Michael was laid off the week before Christmas. No severance package, no warnings, just an email and a box for his desk items. He'd been so confident in his position that he hadn't seen it coming. Jessica's situation wasn't much better. The fashion tech startup she'd worked for had been struggling for months, and when the funding dried up in early 2023, the company folded. She was suddenly unemployed, trying to find work in an industry where everyone knew who she was and what she'd done. See, the internet has a long memory, especially for women who betray other women. While Michael could quietly fade into the background and eventually rebuild his career, Jessica's name was permanently attached to the phrase, "the best friend who stole the groom." Every job interview ended the same way. Things would be going well until the interviewer would pause, look at her resume again, and say something like, "Jessica Torres. That name sounds familiar. Did you go to Berkeley?" And Jessica would know that they'd Googled her, found the articles, seen the photos, and made their decision. By the spring of 2023, she'd moved back in with her parents in San Diego. Her relationship with Michael had fallen apart months earlier. It turned out that a relationship built on betrayal and ego doesn't have a strong foundation. Who knew? Jessica tried to reach out to Sarah once, a long email sent to an address she wasn't even sure was still active. She apologized, explained that she'd been confused and selfish, that she knew what she'd done was unforgivable, but she hoped Sarah could find it in her heart to forgive her someday. Sarah never responded. She'd moved on to a place where Jessica simply didn't exist anymore. While her ex-fiancé and former best friend were struggling, Sarah was building an empire. With the capital from the Titan partnership and the credibility it provided, she was able to secure additional funding from venture capital firms that had previously ignored her. In March of 2023, Logisync closed a Series A round of $65 million, valuing the company at over $300 million. Sarah used that money to expand rapidly, hiring top talent, opening offices in New York and Austin, and developing new features that made Logisync essential for any business dealing with complex supply chains. By the end of 2023, Logisync had 30,000 customers and was generating over $100 million in annual revenue. Industry analysts were calling it one of the fastest-growing B2B software companies in history. Sarah was featured on the cover of Forbes with the headline, "The $300 Million Woman, How Sarah Mitchell Built an Empire from Heartbreak." The article detailed her story, though Sarah herself refused to talk about Michael or Jessica by name. "I don't believe in revenge," she told the interviewer. "I believe in excellence. When someone shows you who they are, you don't waste energy trying to punish them. You invest that energy in becoming someone they could never reach, even if they tried." The article went viral, not just in tech circles but across social media. Sarah became an icon for anyone who'd ever been underestimated or betrayed. Young women especially connected with her story, the idea that you could take the worst moment of your life and transform it into fuel for something extraordinary. In May of 2024, Sarah was invited to speak at a tech conference in San Francisco, one of those massive events where thousands of people gather to hear about the future of innovation. She almost didn't go. Public speaking still made her nervous, and she'd spent so long in hiding mode that being in front of a crowd felt uncomfortable. But her team convinced her it was important for the company's visibility, so she agreed. The day of her keynote, Sarah stood backstage, reviewing her notes, when she heard someone say her name. She turned, and there was Michael. He looked older, tired. He was wearing a badge that marked him as an attendee, not a speaker or VIP, just someone who'd paid for a ticket like thousands of others. "Sarah," he said again, and she could hear something in his voice that might have been regret. "I just wanted to say congratulations. What you've built is incredible." Sarah looked at him, really looked at him, and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no lingering hurt. Just the mild indifference you'd feel toward a stranger. "Thank you," she said simply. Michael seemed to be waiting for more, maybe hoping she'd engage, ask how he was doing, give him an opening to explain or apologize or justify. When she didn't, he tried again. "Look, I know things ended badly between us, and I've thought a lot about that day. If I could go back—" "You can't," Sarah interrupted, not unkindly, just factually. "And honestly, Michael, I'm grateful that you can't. You did me a favor." "A favor?" He looked confused. "You humiliated me in front of everyone I knew." "You freed me," Sarah corrected. "I was building Logisync when I was with you, but I was also trying to be the person you wanted me to be. Someone smaller, quieter, someone who didn't intimidate you. After you left, I stopped trying to shrink myself. I stopped caring what anyone thought. And that's when everything changed." Michael didn't know what to say to that. Sarah checked her watch. "I have to go. They're introducing me in 5 minutes. I hope things work out for you, I really do. But I need you to understand that you're not part of my story anymore. You're just a chapter I've already finished reading." She walked away without waiting for a response, and 10 minutes later, she was on stage in front of 3,000 people, talking about the future of supply chain technology and the importance of building systems that work for everyone, not just the biggest players. Today, Logisync is valued at over $2 billion. Sarah Mitchell is 34 years old and one of the youngest self-made female billionaires in the United States. She's on the board of 3 major corporations, she's an advisor to several venture capital firms, and she started a foundation that provides funding and mentorship to women entrepreneurs in tech. She never got married, though she's been in a relationship for the past year with someone who works in environmental law, someone she describes as kind, smart, and secure enough not to be threatened by my success. She doesn't talk about Michael or Jessica publicly anymore. When interviewers ask about that time in her life, she pivots quickly to discussing the lessons she learned about resilience and focus. Michael eventually found work at a smaller firm, nothing like the position he had before. He's doing fine by most measures, but he'll never reach the level he thought was his destiny. Sometimes when he's alone, He looks at articles about Sarah and wonders what his life would have been like if he'd made a different choice. Jessica moved to Portland and works in project management at a nonprofit. She's rebuilt her life quietly, away from social media, away from the spotlight. She thinks about Sarah sometimes too, about the friendship they had and the person she used to be before ego and jealousy poisoned everything. She's tried therapy, tried to understand why she did what she did, and she's made peace with the fact that some mistakes are too big to fix, some bridges too burned to rebuild. And Sarah? Sarah is exactly where she's supposed to be. So what's the lesson here? Is it about revenge? Not really. Sarah didn't destroy Michael and Jessica. She didn't need to. They destroyed themselves through their own choices and their own weaknesses. Is it about success being the best revenge? Closer, but still not quite right. Because Sarah's success wasn't about Michael at all. He was just the catalyst, the match that lit a fire that was always there, waiting for the right moment to burn. The real story here is about what happens when someone who's been underestimated finally stops seeking validation from people who never deserved to give it in the first place. It's about the difference between being chosen and choosing yourself. Michael thought he was choosing Jessica over Sarah, but what he was really choosing was comfort over growth, ego over partnership, the illusion of value over the real thing. And Sarah? She didn't choose revenge or bitterness or anything destructive. She chose herself. She chose to take every ounce of pain and rejection and transform it into purpose. She chose to build something meaningful not because she wanted to prove Michael wrong, but because she finally stopped trying to prove anything to anyone who didn't matter. That's the most powerful choice of all. So let me ask you this. Have you ever been in Sarah's position? Have you ever had someone in your life, a partner, a friend, a colleague, who made you feel like you needed to be smaller so they could feel bigger? And if so, what did you do about it? Did you shrink to fit their expectations, or did you walk away and build something they couldn't touch? Because here's what Sarah's story teaches us. The people who betray you are giving you information. They're showing you that they were never strong enough to stand beside you while you rose. They were never secure enough to celebrate your success. They were never worthy of the trust you gave them. And once you accept that, once you really internalize it, you stop wasting energy on anger or grief or the need for vindication. You redirect that energy toward becoming someone so far beyond their reach that they become irrelevant. Michael didn't lose Sarah because he chose Jessica. He lost Sarah because he chose to be the kind of person who would do that in the first place. And you can't win back what you fundamentally misunderstood from the beginning. So if you're watching this and you're going through something similar, if someone just walked out of your life or betrayed your trust or made you feel worthless, I want you to hear this. They didn't see your value, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. They just weren't equipped to recognize it. And now you have a choice. You can spend your energy trying to make them understand what they lost, or you can spend that energy becoming so undeniably extraordinary that their opinion becomes meaningless. Sarah chose the second option, and it changed everything. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think Sarah's story is inspiring, or do you think she should have found a way to forgive Michael and Jessica? Do you believe in second chances for people who betray you, or do you think some actions are simply unforgivable? And most importantly, if you were in Sarah's position, standing at that altar, watching your entire life fall apart in front of everyone you knew, what would you have done differently, or would you have done exactly what she did? Leave your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and I want to know where you stand on this. And if this story affected you, if it made you think or feel something, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Because this is just the beginning. We have more stories coming that will challenge everything you think you know about love, betrayal, success, and what it really means to win in life. Thanks for watching.